Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're starting today Vayigash, the second talk in selections of Lekutei Sichot. The topic of our destruction would be the quality of a neck and the idea of crying. Why do we cry? What does crying achieve? My goal is to study the entire talk. I did it last week and it worked wonderful, so I hope to do it today too. We begin. And the verse, and he fell on the neck of Benjamin, his brother, and wept. And Benjamin wept on his neck. Our sages comment. When Yosef reveals himself in this week's portion, says, I am Yosef. And it says that he kissed every one of his brothers. Once he's done kissing, he turned to Benjamin. It doesn't say that he kissed them, but he hugged them and he fell on his necks, plural, and Benjamin also cried on his neck, and they both cried. Says our sages, Yosef cried for two Batei Mikdash, two temples, as alluded to by the plural from the word tzavrei. Tzavrei, not tzavar. Tzavar is neck. Tzavrei is both necks. Translated as neck, that would be built in the tribal portion of Benjamin and later destroyed. Benjamin wept for the sanctuary of Shiloh that would be built in the tribal portion of Yosef and later destroyed. Yosef cried on both necks. A neck represent the holy temple. And therefore they were plural because there were two temples that were destroyed. Which tribe owned that piece of land? It was Benjamin. There is a very funny situation in temple. One part was owned by Benjamin, the other was by Yehuda. Yehuda, there was one section that was coming out. Benjamin had, I believe, the Holy of Holies and the Holy. Everything else belonged to Yehuda. So that's the way it was. So because it was in the portion of Benjamin, Yosef is crying and weeping for the fact that he knew prophetically that those temples will be destroyed. And Benjamin also wept on his neck because Yosef's section is a town of Shiloh in the Galilee, where the tabernacle would be there for 369 years after they crossed the Jordan Valley and entered the Holy Land. For 369 years, there was a temple in there, a temporary dwelling. However, it was destroyed by the Philistines. They stole the ark, they stole the tablets. It was a mayhem for the Jewish people. So it was a destruction that brought into the temple in the section of Yosef. Yosef's tribe had that portion. So that's why it says that he wept on his neck, plural, and Yosef and Benjamin cried on his neck because there was only one, the Shiloh tabernacle.
The Jews knew that the temple was going to be built in Yerushalayim, so why does it hang around for 369 years?
Because they had to build it only when God commanded them. They had to purchase the land, and they had to find the one assigned by God. There were three conditions, at least, and much, much more, that had to be met before they can build.
Well,
First, they did not purchase the land yet. The land still belonged to the Jebusites. Number two, God did not allow them. David wanted to, and God did not allow him. And number three, God had to appoint somebody. So there was no way that they can. By the way, when it was in Shiloh, they weren't yet, they did not completely conquer the entire land. Later on, they kept conquering or purchasing land.
14 years ago.
Right, but I don't think it was the entire Holy Land. It was the portion that was supposed to be divided among them, and majority of them had been settled.
But David was allowed.
But there were tribes living in the Holy Land, the Philistines, the Jebusites. There were many that lived there. What?
He was allowed to bring the ark to Jerusalem.
Who?
David, right? Didn't David bring the ark to Jerusalem?
David brought it to Jerusalem, but was not allowed to build a permanent building. He was allowed by God to bring it, and they had a temporary dwelling there. The Medrash explains why the neck is used as an analogy for the Beit HaMikdash when interpreting the verse, your neck is like the Tower of David. The Medrash says that in Proverbs, It says, I'm sorry, in Song of Songs, it says that your neck is like the Tower of David. In other words, the neck of the Jewish people is like the Tower of David. In other words, the Tower of David, the temple, is compared to a neck within the Jewish people. Joseph's and therefore, when Joseph wept on the necks of Binyamin, and Binyamin wept on the neck of Joseph, it refers to the destruction of the temples, because the temples are compared to a neck. And the Medrash continued to explain the reason. Joseph's the neck is at the high point of a person's body, so too the Beit HaMikdash is located at the high point of the world. The neck is very high, above the entire body except the head. The same as the Holy Temple was on top of a mountain that's above the rest of the universe. The expression at the high point of the world is not, however, to be interpreted literally, for as our sages comment on the verse, he shall dwell between his shoulders, and the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, is 23 cubits lower than the spring of a tam, just as a person's neck, though at a high point on his body, is lower than his head. And so in other words, the Rebbe says it's not to be literally that it's the highest point of the universe, first, because it's not. Number two, the Gemara says that there was a spot, a spring, in Jerusalem, among the mountains, that was higher than the temple. How much? 23 cubits. A cubit is about a foot and a half. So 23 cubits is about 45 feet. So there was a mountain peak that was higher, the Temple Mount, about 45 feet higher. The reason they chose it there is because they wanted to be like a neck. The neck is not the peak part of the human. It's below the head, but it's very, very high. It's the highest point, except the head is sitting on top of the neck. Says the Rebbe, just as a person's neck, though at a high point on his body, is lower than his head, on the contrary, when King David and Shmuel the prophet were seeking to determine the location of the Beit HaMikdash, they said, let us lower its side a drop, for it is written, it shall dwell between its shoulders. There is no more attractive portion of an ox than the place between his shoulders. According to this interpretation, at the high point of the world means among the higher points of the world. When David and Samuel, Shmuel the prophet, told David that he is assigned to find the location, he's the one who purchased that, he's the one who amassed the treasures, God did not allow him to actually build it, but he is the one who he purchased the land for that purpose. They looked, they had few choices. They had the highest point, and they said, we don't want it to be the highest, but we want a little bit lower than the highest, and that's when they picked Temple Mount, which was 45 feet below the highest peak of another mountain just next to it. Therefore, why? Because they said, if you look on an ox, by the way, the temple was built in a shape of which animal? Lion. Shape of a lion. That the head is the largest part and the body is shrinking. The temple also was built this way. The height is compared to an ox. If anybody knows, the chariot of God consists of the book of Ezekiel, 4 legs, right? Each one is a different king among its creatures. You have the human, you have the eagle among birds, you have the lion among all beasts, and you have the ox among all animals, domesticated animals. So the ox is a kosher animal too. The ox, the rabbis looked at another rabbi, Samuel and David looked at an ox and they said, if we are to look at the most attractive point of the animal, it's his neck, because his neck is sitting just below the body, a little bit below. It's the most attractive, beautiful point of view. And therefore they said, let's do the temple also figuratively like a neck, because the neck of the ox. What's the uniqueness of a neck? A neck is very, very high, but not the highest. You have the head above it. So therefore they picked a mountain which represents a neck. So far, so good?
Yeah.
Is this the first time you're studying it? You see it? Okay.
Geographically, there are many other heights in Israel that are higher than
Not in Jerusalem
not
mountains.
Jerusalem, in Israel.
But Jerusalem is a chosen city of God. just like the Holy Land. You can pick in Turkey, Mount Ararat, you'll have much time, but then nobody will come on the holidays. Unless they
Hard
can
enough getting
afford,
up to Jerusalem.
unless they can afford a helicopter.
It's easy to get a room.
But within the holy city of Jerusalem, it was surrounded by mountains. And therefore they could have picked one mountain that was higher. They chose one just below the highest for representing the neck. The neck of an ox is below the head. Now, in our human being, when Joseph fell on the neck of Benjamin, and Benjamin fell on his neck, that's the description. It is because they were weeping about the destruction of the temples were compared to a neck. Now we understand the connection between the necks. Ask the Rabbi. On the surface, the above requires explanation. Why is not being at the highest point considered a positive virtue and attractive? If there is no advantage to height, why do our sages teach that the Beit HaMikdash is located at the high point of the world? And if height is a virtue, as implied by our sages' statement, similarly, whatever is higher is more attractive and of greater virtue. Why then is the Beit HaMikdash lower than the stream of Eitan? There is saying, tell me, is height great virtue? Is it a plus or not? If it's a plus, go to the highest point. If it's not a plus, why do you choose a high peak? Choose a valley. Choose another mountain that's easier to climb. Remember, those days there was no Egged buses to take you to the Kotel. You had to walk or go with a donkey. Climbing those mountains, not every donkey can carry in one shot, especially if you have a large family. So what happens? It would take them a long time. Pick another mountain that's low. There are plenty of mountains. By the way, I was in Israel a couple of years ago, and I told the guys, show me the best place to see the Holy Temple. And he took me to a place. It's actually on the border with Jordan. There is an entrance from Jordan there. And
By the Alhambra Bridge.
By
the Alhambra Bridge.
right. You see, and he says to me, that's where Abraham came from when he went to slaughter his son, because it says that he saw the place from far. It's the only place you can see it. You look down, actually. You look down if you have been there. You've been there?
I've been there, but it was dark.
Okay, so I went twice with my kids, some of my kids. It's a beautiful sight because you see the whole of Jerusalem, you see so many mountains, and then you see the Temple Mount, you see it right there. Now to go down, you have to go to a valley and then climb up. It's a very difficult task.
Well, you have to go by the Mount of Olives. Isn't it by the Mount
Of course, yes, of course, but it depends where you're coming from, yes. But the point is that it's a very high climbing. You could, if height is of great virtue, pick the spring of Eitam, which is on top of another mountain nearby that's much higher. Why pick this one?
You needed the water.
Do you understand? I had plenty of water. They had a spring under the
But
temple,
the
you know
spring
that.
was fed by a time, you needed something higher in order to spring in your, if they put.
So that's not the reason they give. That's your reason.
Well,
Tool of Siloam, that's what they.
Right.
Otherwise, they didn't have pumps, they wouldn't have been able to bring it
Yes, but it's strong, but you can see it, they blocked it. I used to, as a child, we used to go there and you can put your feet in. It goes all the way outside of Jerusalem. That's where Tzidkiyahu, the last Judea king, was hiding, and that's where he ran away from. And he was captured at the other end. The above question, so again, the question, I don't want you to lose sight because I want to move. The question is, if height is of great virtue, it should be the highest. If it's not a great virtue, why pick a mountain? The above questions can be resolved by explaining the function of a neck. Let's discover what's the purpose of a neck, which serves a body, which serves as a point of transition between the head and the body. What's the purpose of a neck? The neck is connecting the head to the rest of the body. A person's collective life energy rests in the brain and is transmitted to the body through the medium of the esophagus, trachea, and veins in the throat. So you have the esophagus that brings esophagus is it brings the windpipe. It's the windpipe brings air, and trachea. Trachea allows for food to come down and bring life. And also there are blood veins that go from the head to the heart. The heart is pumping to the head. I just want you to know that we don't have time to delve in deeper, but the esophagus and the trachea both function in opposite directions. The esophagus is bringing air. The esophagus, the trachea.
It's the other way around. Trachea's the air.
The esophagus brings food, so it takes food down. It goes from up to down. The windpipe, that's the esophagus, the trachea allows for air to come out. It comes into the nose. Okay,
Yeah,
but
think of tracheotomy. Tracheotomy is when they go in and then you open the trachea because you can't breathe. So that's why
okay.
it's trachea.
So each one function opposite direction. And then you have the blood veins. The blood veins are there to pump, to make the brain stay alive through the heart's pumping. Says the Rebbe, a similar pattern is found with regards to the transmission of the power of thought. The external dimension of the power of thought is drawn down from the brain to the heart, and from there its influence is spread throughout the entire body. Now, so you have one thing that the neck is responsible to allow for food to come down, for allow for breathing, and to allow for blood to go into the brains. But there is another portion, another purpose. And the other purpose is to allow the brains where it thinks, I want to go and hire an Uber. Now it goes down to the heart, and the heart send the command to the entire body, and every body part does their part in ordering Uber, paying for it, giving instructions, etc. This comes through the medium of the throat. So everything is the bridge. If you want to know life in every aspect, food, oxygen, blood, or command central has to go through the neck. The neck is the bridge that controls every function of the body without an exception. This comes through the medium of the throat, a narrow organ that is interposed in between them. Thus, the neck possesses a certain advantage over even the head, for it is the neck and throat that make it possible for the head's purpose to be carried out, enabling few things. So, says the Rebbe, in functionality of the human being, the throat is even more important than the brains, because the brains can come up with ideas, but without the throat carrying it to the rest of the body, it wouldn't happen. Imagine you have a central command is sitting in a bunker, and they are planning the war of 200,000 soldiers, but there is no communication channel. They cannot deliver the message to the soldiers or the higher ups in the fields. Nothing will happen. So the throat is in control even of the brains. All the limbs to receive their life energy from the head. First, you want to get energy from the head. It comes through the throat. That's the blood. B, all of them to conduct themselves according to the power of thought judged by the head. The head will contemplate what he wants to do, and it will be delivered through the throat into the rest of the body. When the head and neck are considered independently, therefore, if you separate the two, the head one side and the throat to the other, therefore, even in a physical sense, it is higher than it. This advantage, however, applies only to the order within a person's internal hierarchy. When speaking about the ultimate purpose and mission of the head, there is an advantage to the neck precisely because it is lower. Being lower enables it to serve as a point of transition and enables it to transmit vitality and the power of thought from the head to the body. So if you are separating head and neck and ask which one is more important, obviously the head is more important. The head makes decision, the head is deciding, the head is in control of the entire body. That's why it's above the neck. However, the neck, if you talk about the functionality as a whole, the line of communication is the most crucial part. I think I want to stop just for a moment and share with you, in relationship, the most crucial point of a lasting relationship, specifically husband and wife, parents and children, employer and employee, is the line of communication. It's not my talent, it's not my kindness, it's not my ability, it's not my wealth, it's not all the other blessings we are blessed with. If you're able to communicate well, you would be able to connect with another person. Last night and yesterday morning, we discussed about communication. To establish communication, you have to empty yourself out, because it's not about you. Well, I have so much. It's not about I am very smart, I know the solution, I'm going to take you there, I'm going to show you the world. It doesn't work like that. The line of communication in this context is the most crucial way. And that's why we are all men, happen to be this time, not last week, but this week we're all men. We need to know that women are masterful naturally in the line of communication, and we need to respect that, because part of the reason is because they are much more humble, and therefore the line of communication comes out much, much easier for them. So we have a lot to learn from them. Similar concept applies with regard to the Beit HaMikdash, which is described with the analogy of the neck. Now we can understand why the temple is not the head, but the neck, figuratively in the height, and we compare it to the neck. Its primary advantage is its slight descent from the foremost peak. For the purpose of the Beit HaMikdash is to serve as a medium through which godly light is drawn down to illuminate the world, even those elements of existence on the lowest levels. Therefore, the Beit HaMikdash was located on a high point, but not on the highest point. It was not elevated entirely from the world, but where that so it will have been too lofty and could not have served as a medium to illuminate the world. It was therefore necessary to lower its height a drop, to bring it closer to and into connection with the world, so that it would illuminate the universe. This resembles a person's neck, which, because it is lower than the elevated station of the head and closer to the body, is able to serve as a point of transition between the two and join them together. Did you understand what we studied? Makes sense. The universe, the Holy Temple's purpose is to bring God into the universe, to connect two opposites, godly, spirituality, egoless, and the universe, which represented ego. The only way to do that is that the temple is compared to a neck, where it is lower than the highest point, so it can transmit godliness into the universe. What if it would place in the highest peak? Then it representing God, but it's totally removed from the universe. Just like the head is totally removed from the body, the neck is the one who connects it. Without the neck, the body and the head are two separate entities. The head representing God, the body representing the universe. The neck is the one who connects them both. Therefore, it has to be not the highest, but almost the highest, connected directly to the body. That's why the Holy Temple is placed in a spot that is considered a neck. And that's why when they wept on the neck of each other, because the temple is what a neck is about.
It's a conduit.
A conduit to God to impact the universe. And therefore, it can be only a neck, because if it was the head, it would be totally removed from the universe. Yes.
So is the neck representing the temple or the temple mount? The place of
The temple itself, not the temple mount, the temple itself. The same is true regarding the Beit HaMikdash in microcosm that exists within every Jew. His godly soul. When a person's soul is not uplifted and exalted to the point of separation from his own private world, but instead is involved and clothes itself within it, enabling him to refine his animal soul, body, and portion in the world of the world, his entire existence become a sanctuary for God's light. Says the Rebbe, that's why in spirituality you need to humble yourself to connect with the rest of you activities and life. If you are separating the godly soul from the rest of the body, it's not going to work. Now, says the Rebbe, on this basis, we can understand why Yosef fell and wept on Binyamin's neck, and Binyamin wept on his. One might ask, why did each weep on his brother's neck? Why didn't each weep on his brother's head, as it is the primary and most elevated portion of the person's body? Why do they weep on their neck? They should weep on their heads, not on the neck.
But that would be such an awkward situation. The neck, at least you can.
You
without
say
shoulder-
that maybe one of them was shorter.
I wasn't there. But the point is, Rabbi, that people weep on each other's neck or shoulder. No one weeps on this person's head.
Okay, but if they want to weep on the destruction of the temple, temple is the highest
I see.
commodity, the highest holiest place in the universe, right? You're weeping over that. Should weep over the head, not the neck, representing the temple. Says the Rebbe, this question can be resolved as follows. The Jew's ultimate purpose is described by our sages. I was created solely to serve my Creator. That service involves the consummation of God's intent in the creation of each individual person and creation of the entire spiritual cosmos, and particularly our material world, namely to make a dwelling for him in the lower realms. Everything is in the hands of heaven except for fear of heaven. Indeed, fear is the beginning of divine service and its fundamental quality and root. Hence, the consummation of God's intent is dependent on the divine service of the Jewish people and on each individual Jew. It is they who are entrusted with making a dwelling for God in the lower realms, through which one refines his body, his animal soul, and his portion in the world. Therefore, the fundamental element of these efforts, even with regards to the head, is the neck, which enables this service to be carried out, as explained above. Hence, Yosef and Binyamin wept on each other's neck rather than head, for A, there is no reason to cry over their head, for why? That is the soul of a Jew. Even when the Jew sins, his soul is still faithful to God, and B, the purpose of a Jew is not reflected by his head, which is associated with the service of the soul for itself, but in his neck, which relates to the soul's effort on the body, the animal soul, and its portion in the world, as explained above. So the Rebbe says that's why they wept on each other's neck, because the head representing the godly soul, or God. The godly soul never gets tainted. Therefore, even when the temple destroyed, the godly soul remains with the Jew, and therefore nothing happened to it. So there is no reason to weep. You weep on the neck. The neck is the connection to the universe. When the temple is destroyed, within the person is when the person is not willing to accommodate the godly soul. That's the neck, refusing to do its job, and that's a reason to weep. Another point the Rebbe says, the purpose of a neck, the temple, or the purpose of a human being is to serve as a neck, and that is to connect God, the head, into the rest of my body, to function, behave, and act and think the way God wants. And therefore, when the temple is destroyed, representing the fact that a Jew go away from God, that's the neck that is dysfunctional, because the head is always remain godly. It's always God. God is always there. God is not get affected. That's the neck. Any questions so far? Now we're going to talk about crying. So now we understand the function of the neck. We understand why they wept on someone else's neck. We understand the neck as representing the Holy Temple. We understand that the neck is something that within each Jew, in Kabbalistic terminology, represent the change between time of temple and the time of destruction. Destruction means that the neck got broken, and therefore the communication from the head to the rest of the body is not flowing properly. As the Rebbe, further explanation is nevertheless required. Why did Yosef weep over the Batei Mikdash that were built in the tribal portion of Binyamin, while Binyamin wept on the sanctuary built on the tribal portion of Yosef? Seemingly, each one of them should have wept over the destruction that would take place in his own tribal portion, for ultimately a person is close to his own self. The Rebbe is asking, I don't understand. Who is crying for the temple that is going to be built in his brother's neck section, and the brother is crying over what is going to be built in his section? Let them cry about each one's neck, not one another. I'm skipping. The rabbi is saying that my business comes before my other people's business. So if the destruction of temple is a matter of seriousness, my destruction, my temple is far more and takes priority over my other person. And therefore, if they were crying about the destruction of the neck of the temple, it should affect my temple more than the other. So I should cry about myself before I cry about others. The Rebbe is asking later on, we see that Yosef fell on the neck of Yaakov. When they meet, Yaakov and Yosef will meet. It says that Yosef fell on the neck of Yaakov. We don't see that Yaakov fell on Yosef's neck. And there is different commentaries. One say the most famous commentary, the answer is Yaakov was saying the Shema. He was reciting the Shema, so he couldn't stop to fall on his neck. But the Zohar explained it differently, and the Rabbi is asking, how is it possible that Yaakov didn't cry for the neck of Yosef, and Yosef is crying for the neck of Yaakov? Now the Rabbi is going to explain crying. Page number 600, number 4. These concepts can be explained as follows. Regarding worldly matters, why does someone cry? To release tension and make himself feel better. Again, when I cry, what does crying makes? It makes me feel better. It releases tension. Oh, I feel much better. When people cry, I come to visit families who lost somebody. I have a conversation with somebody and they start crying. After they cry, they feel a lot better. It's not the words, it's the tears. As we see in actual life, when a person cries over a difficult and aggravating matter, the crying has no power to rectify the circumstances that prompted it. However, as reflected by the verse, my tears were like bread for me. King David says that the tears was like eating bread. In other words, it satiated him and calmed him down. When someone cries, there is no solution to the problem. That person is gone from their life. That job is gone. That opportunity is not there. But crying makes you calm down a little bit. This leads to the conclusion that when a person has the potential to correct a matter, he should do what he can to correct it rather than calm himself by crying. Do you understand that? If I have a business opportunity that I lost, but there is a chance for me going after, making another appointment, calling friends, calling people to convince them, then I'm not allowed to cry. I have to do whatever it takes to try and figure it out and correct it and fix it. So if someone has a problem in relationship and they're about to lose the spouse, instead of crying, they should hire professionals, they should go for counseling, they should try and amend their situation. Crying is not taking place when there is an opportunity to correct a problem. When a person sees the destruction of a colleague's Beit HaMikdash, he shares their pain and cries. However, the fundamental correction of the problem and the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash is not dependent on him, but on his colleague. He can, and indeed he is obligated to help his colleagues by A, reproving him in a pleasant manner, and B, arousing divine mercy and praying for him. Nevertheless, in other words, if I see that something is about to be destroyed in my own projects, I have to fight for it. I have to do whatever it takes. But what if I see someone else's, my neighbor, my friend, my family member who is losing something? I have to either try to tell them to change their behavior so it should change, or to try and be there for them to help them fix it. Nevertheless, actually negating the sins that caused the destruction of his colleague's Beit HaMikdash is dependent on his colleague, and that colleague has free choice. Therefore, when a person has done everything he can to help his colleague and sees that his colleague's Beit HaMikdash remains destroyed, his soul will be impacted and he will cry. Says the Rebbe, you have a friend, he's about to lose a spouse, he's about to lose his house because there's flooding. You do whatever you can. You put all the efforts and you try very hard, but at the end of the day, it didn't work out. All you can do now, after you try and did everything, is cry with him. Crying with him will release his and yours pain. But if someone temple is destroyed, temple means a relationship with God, relationship with others, you know that a lot of it has to do with the person's, with my colleagues' behavior. You can try and reprimand them, you can try and correct them, you can try and advise them, you can try and do whatever you can. If everything all fails, that's when you cry. Says the Rebbe, all this refers to one's relation with others. It's all about other people you're allowed to cry. When, by contrast, a person sees that his own Beit HaMikdash has been destroyed, he cannot content himself with sighing and weeping. On the contrary, he must try to correct the situation and build anew by performing his divine service in a manner that brings about an individual's experience of redemption within his own soul. When something happens to me, I have to take note and learn how to do it again. We studied it last night. Before light comes darkness. The destruction is a stepping stone to another relationship, to a healthier project, to a better business opportunity. So therefore, there is no room for crying. Crying is there for somebody else after I tried everything to help them and it failed. I cry with them, it helps them. But if things happen, the same things happen to me, instead of crying, go and fix it, build a new house, make another relationship, find another business.
I think people will cry on their own problems also. They won't actively try to correct it, they'll cry and then they'll try to correct it, but crying, I think, is part of the situation.
Crying is appropriate when there is guaranteed no way to fix it. For example, losing somebody who died. That's when Shiva lebechi. It says 7 days for crying. But in life, other than an ultimate destruction, an ultimate loss, if it is within an iota, a small percentage of correcting or restarting, crying has no room. Instead, we have to strengthen ourselves and find out. Last night, we expanded on it in great length, that every time you have a challenge, every time a person is faced a challenge, it's for a purpose. In fact, if you don't have challenges, it means your projects you're not utilizing your potential. So whenever you have a challenge or a destruction or a painful experience, it is for correcting it, starting something new, moving on, action. Crying is kind of giving up. It applies sometimes, but it's only when it's ultimately there is nothing else can be done. The only, maybe the rabbi is talking about. Oh, the rabbi is the only exception, right? That's what we're holding.
Yeah.
The only exception is when the whipping comprises tears of teshuvah. In that instance, the whipping itself is an act of improvement and building, as implied by the verse, place my tears in your jug. We say to God, take my tears as a sign of teshuvah. When someone committed a crime against God, or made a crime, a serious crime, and is fully repentant, and crying shows a serious riyah. So if I stand before a judge for committing a crime, and I say, please forgive me and understand this was a mistake, and I'm pleading with the judge to the point of tears, no heart of flesh will stay the same. They always soften and avert the decree or soften the decree. Why? Because the tears in that point are absolutely acceptable. And King David says, God, count my tears in your jug so that when it's filled, you should redeem me. There is a famous song by Avraham Fried. Avraham Fried is one of the most famous Hasidic singers, about the story that is told from father to son, that God has a big vat that is filling up with the tears of the Jewish people throughout history. Excuse me a second. And so there is a tradition that there is a big vat, and all the tears of history of pogroms and destruction and murder and raping fill up. And when this barrel or vat, it will be filling up, that's when God will bring Mashiach. And the child is asking his father, when will that happen? And the father says, I believe that it's already happened. So God, they both sing, God, please fulfill your promise that it's time to bring Mashiach. Let's continue. By contrast, ordinary weapon can at times weaken one's effort to rebuild his own Beit HaMikdash, for he will think that he has already fulfilled his obligation by whipping. Says the Rebbe, in summary, that's why Yosef whipped on whose temple? Binyamin. Because for himself, he can correct his behavior and fix it. It shouldn't be destroyed. Binyamin cannot cry on his own. He has to cry on someone else. Because for his own, you shouldn't cry. You should be busy with the project of actual building. And the Rebbe is asking what Harry's touched upon. They knew it's going to be destroyed. And the prophet is already telling the Jewish people later on that they will be destroyed. They will be not permanent because of their behavior. So what are you crying about? God already decided it? Says the Rebbe, it says in the, we study in our tradition that even a sharp blade is placed over your neck. Never cease from asking for mercy because God can change at the last moment, just like he did for Moshe. Moshe, the sword of the Pharaoh's butcher was over his neck, and God makes his neck turn like marble, and nothing happened to it. In other words, even though they knew that's the prediction of the future, they had the ability of changing it and improving it. Positive, God will not change. Negative, God will always enable. I just want to share with you one point. The idea of the tears over the neck of Yosef, it is about the temporary temple. And one can ask, what was wrong? The reason it was destroyed, right after it was destroyed, it's moved to Nov and Gilgal, and then it moved in for 52 years. It moved to different places, and then it moved to Jerusalem by King David. It was temporary anyway. So there are different explanations why. One of them is that at that time, at the era of the time, the Philistines were hurting the Jewish people so severely that the Jewish people felt like they want to kill themselves. Also, they stole the Holy Ark with the temple from that tabernacle. King Saul chased the Philistines. He was able to take out the tablets, but not the ark. Not the ark. So this was a very painful period, and that's what he was crying about, not the actual structure. Some say that this was the only structure that had the combination of a tabernacle and a temple, because tabernacle is temporary dwelling. Temple is a permanent building. In Shiloh, the tabernacle had been the same as coming from the desert, however, except the walls. The walls were supposed to be of 20 beams on the length and 8 on the sides. Here they did a cement block building, except the tapestry was covering the top. So it has a temple and a tabernacle combination that never had before or after. And therefore, the destruction of that is considered like 2 destructions. That's why it says plural by Yosef against Binyamin. I'm sorry, Binyamin crying over the neck of Yosef, because even though it was only 1 destruction, that structure, but that structure equals the destruction of 2 entities, temple and tabernacle, which is 2 separate entities. And let's see what the rabbi is saying. The rabbi wants us to know weeping and crying is about somebody else's destruction. About my own destruction, if things don't work out for me, you need to try and work it out and fix it. You need to restart something new. You need to make sure that action is what counts, and the head will deliver its ideas to the heart, to the body, to function in the way the head is asking. And thank you very much for participating.
Thank you.